All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the first screencast for Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is going to cover supply and demand model. So this is going to be kind of our workhorse model that we're going to use almost throughout the entire semester to introduce the different concepts of microeconomics. And so this first screencast, we won't quite get to the supply and demand diagram, but we need to talk about a few of the fundamentals of markets and how they work. All right. So markets include two sides. There are firms who supply goods and services, and there are consumers who want to purchase the goods that are supplied by the firms. All right. So exchange happens between firms and consumers, and that happens based on prices that are established in the markets for the different goods and services. All right. Supply or demand factors can change the market price. All right. What are markets? Well, sellers and buyers come together and they form a market. All right. Markets exist whenever goods and services are exchanged between buyers and sellers. All right. Obviously, something like a farmer's market is a market, but also something like eBay where you have buyers and sellers. Those are both examples of markets. All right. So it doesn't have to be a physical place. In fact, a lot of buying and selling these days happens through virtual markets online. All right. So what is a market economy then? Well, a market economy is an economy where most resources are allocated among households and firms with little or no government interference or regulation. All right. So the main economic structure of the United States, and in fact lots of Western European countries, is a market economy. All right. So prices are determined for most goods and services by the forces of supply and demand. All right. Once we talk about the supply and demand model for a while, we're also then going to talk about, well, what happens when governments do intervene or when corporations are able to have so much market power that they're able to set prices. So when prices are no longer determined by the forces of supply and demand. So we're going to start with this baseline case. And in fact, it works pretty well for lots of goods and services that we want to care about. But I do want to go ahead and note here that there are some notable exceptions, some types of goods that it doesn't tend to work as well. And we'll get to that later in the semester. All right. Buying and selling is voluntary is another important part of markets. Either the buyers or the sellers can decide whether or not they want to engage in the exchange. All right. So what are competitive markets? Well, competitive markets have a set of characteristics that are going to be important for us. All right. Now, often in econ, we talk about perfectly competitive markets. So a perfectly competitive market would be one that meets all of these conditions perfectly. Maybe no market meets that 100%. But again, it's a model, and we are abstracting away from the real world to try to understand something about a more complex thing, the real economy. All right. So the extent to which this is a useful model, well, we can gauge that by using statistics or data or things like that to see if the model is useful. But it is a model, and we are going to make some assumptions. All right. So competitive markets have lots of buyers and sellers. This is really important, that no individual has any influence over the price. Everyone is a price taker. Buyers are price takers, and the sellers are price takers in a competitive market. All right. Now, there are markets where that's not true, but that's something we're going to talk about later on. In these competitive markets, the ones we're going to start with, no individual or firm has any influence over the price. The price is fully determined by the market, by all the buyers and all the sellers coming together to exchange. All right. So here are some examples. One fisherman does not determine the price of fish at a fish market. All right. If he sets it too high, he won't be able to sell the fish. If he sets it too low, he won't have made as much money as he could, and he may not cover his cost. So there's lots of buyers for the fish, lots of sellers for the fish, and the price emerges from all of that negotiation and exchange. All right. One farmer doesn't determine the price of corn, right? The price of corn is set by all the buyers and all of the sellers, and it emerges from the market. All right. A monopoly is an important exception to a competitive market. In a monopoly, it's an imperfect market. Buyer or the seller has an influence on the price of whatever the commodity is. So in a monopoly, It exists when a single company supplies the entire market for a good. Mono means one. So some examples are Standard Oil back in the long time ago was one of the only suppliers of oil in the U.S. They supplied all of it. De Beers Diamonds in the early 20th century had almost a complete monopoly on diamonds, and so they were able to set the price for diamonds. All right. So we're not going to do monopoly yet in our supply and demand diagrams. We're going to work through supply and demand in the competitive market first, and then we'll move on to monopoly. All right. So I'm going to leave you with this clip from the 40-year-old Virgin, and it kind of shows you what we mean by virtual markets versus brick and mortar kinds of stores. All right. Thanks.